Namaskar. For the longest time, America was truly secular. The church was separated from the state. What we are seeing now is the reverse. And is this something that should concern all of us living in the United States? Or is this just a passing phase? I have a good friend of mine, Kumar Bala, from across the pond in the United Kingdom, and he has actually put together a slide deck for us. And this has got a lot of useful information. Let's just welcome him first. Kumar, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel. How are you, sir?
Namaskar, Sriji. I'm good, and you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. It's cold in both our countries, and let's warm it up with some really hot conversation here. Kumar, I'm going to just bring up your deck that you had put together. And how did this thought occur to you that perhaps Jefferson's wall is crumbling? Go ahead and share your thoughts, because you're looking at it from a different perspective than I am. I know a little bit of US history, what Jefferson had accomplished and so on and so forth. His Louisiana Purchase, who can forget? But over to you.
Yes, PG. So this is more of an outsider's perspective on our understanding of what United States is and what its values are, right? It's fascinating that one of the reasons why the framers of the Indian Constitution did not want the word secular in it, it's mainly because it is very difficult to define. When we say secular, are we the Indian secularism is different to the French secularism, which is different to the German one, which is different to the British, and which is different to the American one, right? So all of us claim to be secular. But Americans have always argued that they truly have this wall of separation between religion and the state power, what they call as the separation of church and state, which goes back to the origin of the European definition of secularism, right? So I still am not convinced about the use of the word secular in an Indian context, because it doesn't really translate well for the Indian civilization, right? Like in India, you can look at it as two different types of secularism, right? Like Dharma Nirpeksh and Panth Nirpeksh. And Indians have always stuck to the second type of secularism, where the state shall not decide which ethical or moral framework that will determine the policies of the state. That has always been the Indian way of looking at secularism, right? Whereas the American way is slightly different, where it basically says no religion or religious text can exist for the highest office of the state, and also there cannot be any propagation of religion through state apparatus, right? So this is how Americans have historically defined their secularism, and it is generally considered to be one of the strongest and the most robust forms of secularism, right? But it is also interesting to note that amongst the Western secular states, US is the most religious of all. So if you look at Germany and France and United Kingdom and United States, US has the most amount of religiosity. And the argument used to be, well, because the state didn't get involved in religion, there was a free market of religion, so there was prosperity within religion. Whereas if you look at England, there is the Church of England being the official church of the state. It sort of gets boring, and it's sort of top down, and hence religion has not bloomed like it has in the United States with these mega churches and all sorts of political influence that religious groups have in the United States, right? During elections, like the evangelicals and the Catholics and so on and so forth. So what's happening in the United States is interesting. It looks like the edifice on which this is built, or this illusion of secularism or the illusion of the separation, it's coming down, or at least they are getting into the same problem that India might have faced in the past and all the other European states faced in the past, right? So this is my view of what is happening in the American system, and maybe I could pick your brain on what you think is happening over there and what are the lessons for the rest of the world based on the American experience, right?
So let's go to the next slide. Before you weigh in, I just want to add one little thing. So viewers, he is absolutely right when he says that there is more religion in the United States than other countries. For example, our currency, $1 bill, $10, whichever thing you say, there's a very clear message: in God we trust. I mean, most currencies don't talk about God on their currency note. It just says, I promise to pay the bearer of so and so, and it will be signed by the governor of the Reserve Bank or central bank of that country. That's how it is. So there is religion very completely embedded inside the American psyche, and to some extent there are people who believe that only Christians should be presidents, and but those kinds of things, Kumar, this has happened in the past also. When Kennedy ran for president, he was the first Catholic to do so, And people brought that up as a disqualification. When Reagan ran for president, he was the first Irish American to run for president. So again, same kind of questions. First Black American president, Barack Obama. First woman president, and that has still not happened yet. But you get the point that anything that's outside of this, Anglo-Saxon Protestant lineage is looked at with, this person is not qualified. So this is something that has been happening. But is this being taken too far? That is my question, and I'll come to that in just a moment when I'm going to start looking at some specific examples, pro and against, why some people did what they did, and also how for others they're facing a blowback. I'll yield the floor to you. Go ahead and talk to us a little about what happened in January 1802.
Yes. So my understanding of the American history and the American origins of secularism is the fact that they wanted to avoid the sort of sectarian conflict that was ripe across Europe. So when the Puritans ran to the Americas to escape the persecution that they faced in Europe, interestingly, they faced persecution from the state that prevented them from discriminating against other denominations. So the Puritans ran to the United States and set up the form of government after the American War of Independence. The constitution that was drafted then became a secular form of constitution, but with a lot of Christian ethos still embedded into it, right? But the Jefferson's wall of separation, my understanding of it came because of the interdenominational conflicts that was ripe across the United States. For example, in the famous letter in 1802, when Jefferson wrote back to the Danbury Baptists, who were complaining that they were being taxed by the Congregationalist church, but they are not getting anything back in return for the taxes they are paying. So he writes saying that the wall of separation has to be erected between the state and the church. So thereby, in a lot of various conflicts across United States, in Philadelphia, in various other states, it was the interdenominational conflict within the broader Christian church that gave rise to the concept of the American secularism, right? So that's where the word separation of the church and state comes from. It is because in this narrow context in which the Americans are trying to avoid the sort of sectarian conflict that you saw in Germany, the sectarian conflict you saw in France, the sectarian conflict you started to see in the United Kingdom as well, right? So the founding fathers of the United States decided that this is the path that America will take, where the state shall not use any of its resources to promote any particular denomination, and hence the solid wall of separation between the state and the church was built. But as time went by and as more people settled, first the Jewish people, and of course then lots of other faiths, including Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, now live in the United States. They also rely on this separation of church and state to give them the same sort of protection that the founding fathers envisioned that different denominations of the Christian church will have within the bounds of the American state, right? So my question is, are we in a situation where the principle of the American secularism is only going to be valid for Christian denominations, right? You can see in America, I believe for a long time, Catholics were not considered as Christians for some bizarre reason. So they'll always say, oh, he's not a Christian, he's a Catholic, which is bizarre. From a European perspective, it is called a Catholic not being a Christian, right? So yeah, I mean, I think from looking from outside, my question was, do you think the American concept of secularism, this wall of separation between the state and church, is good enough to protect people of other faiths as well, like Muslims and like Hindus and like Sikhs, no faiths as well?
For the most part, yes, but there will be aberrations. There have been aberrations in the past, and people take out their frustrations on you just because you don't happen to look or act similar to what you are. And I'll tell you one situation which was really, really sad. It was somewhere in the Midwest after 9/11. A gunman came and gunned down a lot of Sikhs who were going into a Gurudwara or coming out of the Gurudwara. And his contention was that these people were all Arabs who were with Al-Qaeda. So this kind of mislabeling happens all the time. And it was very sad because they had nothing to do with it. And yet they ended up being victims. So for the most part, America has been able to keep the church and state separate. At the same time, lately what is happening is People are frustrated. It doesn't matter which strata of society you belong to. Maybe the extremely rich ones are really happy, but the rest of the people, all of us are, frustrated. I'm not frustrated, but I'm just saying a large majority. And you want to try and find reason for why things are the way they are for you. And it's easy to go and find somebody and say, oh, it's because of that person that I'm not able to do what I want to do. And this is finding expression in the form of H-1B visas, MAGA statements, even, some of the people who are in the Trump administration taking pot shots at Indians just because India was standing its ground in not signing the free trade agreement the way United States wanted it. So this should have been handled in a more mature manner because it didn't really make a difference. India did not budge. If anything, America is wanting to budge. And still, there is no deal in place. So India is not in a hurry. US is in a hurry, especially given yesterday's debacle across the country. So you see how when you try to interlink or connect things that are not really linked, it really leaves a bad taste in our mouth. So we're going to come to what has been happening with JD Vance and a few other people. But this is essentially the thing. People came to America because they were looking for a better lifestyle. It doesn't matter when. I mean, you had from the 16th, 17th, 18th century people just arriving on ships. There's a place called Ellis Island just outside of the city of New York, which is where all these ships dock. And you had to go through what would be the equivalent of immigration today. And they would even examine your teeth, gums, if you have any scurvy, which is vitamin C deficiency because you are on the sea for so long, and so on and so forth. And then you are let loose and you have to understand, speak, read, and write English. Until then, you are not employable. So these are all challenges that people overcame. And now you see a country that is based on excellence, and that is what is America. On the other hand, in the last 15 years, you're seeing movements like equal outcomes, which is the DEI motto. It doesn't matter what is the input, but the outcome should be equal. And there is a thing that grates against the philosophy of this country. And it is being, the Biden administration went overboard trying to thrust it down our throats. And now it's being undone. But what happens is, while that is being undone, a lot of other things are also coming out. See, this is where we are kind of losing our, what I would call as access, that we are going off of that and then say, oh, by the way, while we are doing this thing, throw out these people, throw out this, and so on and so forth. It doesn't help anyone. This country is great because it has always welcomed immigrants with open arms, and they've always allowed people to practice their religion. It has never interfered in that, and it continues to be true even today. So, be that as it may, 95%, I would say, are still what they were before. And I think everybody kind of follows this Jefferson wall, except what is happening is this belief is being sorely tested. I mean, when Vivek Ramaswamy is, sitting down for an interview with somebody from the South, this person tells it to his face that I'm not going to vote for you because you're not a Christian. And his answer was classic. He said, I'm not running for the Pope of America. I'm running for being the President of America. This was when he was running for president. So, I mean, Vivek is very clear in all these things. But how many people are willing to see his viewpoint? Charlie Kirk was one. Unfortunately, we have lost him now. There were many very interesting conversations where Vivek and Charlie would sit in campuses and field questions. I don't know if you've seen some of those YouTube videos. Very interesting. Questions that, the college student, because they were fairly and squarely targeting the campuses, because that's where you see the wokeism has taken root. You have people splitting atoms in their labs, but when it comes to having political ideas, things are just going off the wheels. I mean, this is something that they need to understand. Whatever you're applying, scientific methods in your work, you should be applying something similar to that in your politics also. Anyway, this is just my 2 cents. Let's go to the next slide. We have a lot to cover.
Indeed. And my question was pointed towards the public offices, right? Like, which has always fascinated me that in Europe, like in Germany, France, or United Kingdom, a religion of a particular candidate is seldom discussed. You know, the famous... Yeah. I think in 1998 or 2002, when Tony Blair was asked about his faith, he said, we don't do religion and politics in the United Kingdom, right? So and it's the same in France and Germany. You generally don't mix the two. But whereas if you look at the American elections, the questions that are sort of religious, like for example, questions about abortion, which is heavily tinted towards the religious faith of people, right? Like people who have strong views towards it generally tend to be religious people as well, right? Mostly religious people. So these tests for the offices, even though there wasn't an explicit test, as in like as you have in Lebanon, that the prime minister has to be of a specific faith, the president has to be of a specific faith, the speaker has to be of a specific faith. We don't have that sort of a situation, but what instead we have is this sort of, you need to get the approval of these mega churches from these evangelical priests before you can actually become a serious candidate in the United States, in any offices. So I'm wondering whether this is even possible for any non-Christian candidate, be that it may an atheist or of any other faith, to actually challenge and become a serious contender, let alone Vivek, who's of Hindu faith. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So I don't know how this thing is going to pan out in terms of the current political swing as well. As you mentioned, I think my view on this is that this is like a pendulum. It swung too far into the other direction. Now it's swinging the other way around. So the sensible people in the middle should somehow get into the middle, that it is not, on one hand, you have all of these equal outcome folks on one hand, and on the other hand, you have all of these extremely xenophobic, extremely narrow-minded people on the other side. Right? So the pendulum can't keep swinging between the two. This is what Douglas Murray says, that it's like as if you're standing in the train station waiting for your train. Not only did the train arrive, but it ran through the station, destroying everything on its way. This is what has happened. Like, because people are finally hoping that we'll come to some sort of an equilibrium where everybody has equal opportunity and can prosper in life. Right? So I think some corrections are due when things like this happen, and that's what happens in democracy, right? Like you mentioned about John F. Kennedy's Catholic faith. Go ahead. Sorry.
So take a look at what has been happening to Indian American politicians. Bobby Jindal, this guy was the governor of Louisiana, but he had to convert to Christianity before he could become a serious contender. Likewise, I believe Nikki Haley also converted, because I think she was in South Carolina, if I remember correctly, South Carolina's governor, and she had to convert too. So Vivek, to me, is a trailblazer, because he's saying, I am who I am. I'm a Hindu American, and accept me for who I am. Same with Congressman Radhakrishnamurthy, same with Congressman Ro Khanna. Although the other Indian American congressmen and women, maybe one or two have done it, they are kind of reluctant to accept that they are Hindu Americans. But you see this problem coming. For electability reasons, people are willing to do some changes to their lifestyle. So I think let's come to the current issue of JD Vance, which I thought was over discussed. At the same time, let's take a quick look at that. And I don't think we have had a Jewish president yet. A couple of times a Jewish American ran as a contender, vice presidential contender, and that ticket actually lost. But I think Dick Cheney is a Jew, so okay, there is a vice president who's a Jewish American. But as far as president is concerned, I don't think that has happened. Bernie Sanders is a Jewish American. Chuck Schumer is a Jewish American. George Soros is a Jew. So we have every kind of mix you can think of. So now what America is seeing is back to its old lines. But it is sad that the Republican Party, which is a huge edifice, is allowing the small extreme right to basically wag the entire body. The tail is wagging the entire body, just like the progressives and the wokes were trying to do it to the Democratic Party.
Indeed.
You see, this is where I have a problem. You have to be inclusive to be in politics. And I'm seeing people trying to divide and conquer and then root. And how long will this continue? I have no idea. But I don't think that's good for the country, because you are going to end up fighting street to street, house to house. And already, the assimilation of various faiths and communities and cultures into America is massive, massive. You can't separate now. And people are living happily with two different faiths. Husband is one faith, wife is a different faith. They don't seem to have a problem until suddenly the state is stepping in and saying, yeah, you should make this a problem.
Indeed.
You see what I'm saying? And I wish Trump would stay out of this. He seems to weigh in. I don't know why.
The other interesting question I always had is this idea of Judeo-Christian civilization, right? Judeo-Christian values, as they call it, which always fascinated me, because if you look at the relationship between the two faiths in Europe, it was one of brutality and persecution. How can anyone deny the sermons of Martin Luther in Germany against the Jewish people, and also of the DSI of conspiring to kill Jesus Christ? Jews have been blamed for centuries all across Europe and have been persecuted, which of course resulted in the eventual Holocaust. And suddenly, in the 1950s and 1960s, you have this American term called Judeo-Christian values, which is really funny for anyone who's studied any level of history to see that, well, you may not each other's throat for particularly Christians persecuting Jews for almost 1,000 years. And suddenly you have this new term called Judeo-Christian. And I think that is now being challenged, not from the left, but from the right. People like Tucker Carlson are now questioning that maybe there is no such thing as Judeo-Christian values. And he now has termed this thing called the Anglo-Christian values, in which he basically says the Western English-speaking societies that are built on individual values around Christianity, and that these are faiths that do not have things like collective punishments, etc. For which I need to ask, what was Jallianwala Bagh for, and what was Boers War concentration camp were? Because if you look at the concentration camps of the Boers War and Jallianwala Bagh and the Kalapani prison, they were all collective punishments. So here you have an American supposedly claiming a newly minted term, Anglo, I think I just came across it in the last couple of weeks, Anglo-Christian values, which basically he says the values of the English-speaking Christians, because he doesn't want to include the Italians and the Spanish and everybody else, and even the Germans, and he wants to carve out a separate identity and somehow ring fence that, forgetting that all the atrocities that happened in Australia and New Zealand against all the Aboriginals by the same civilization as a collective punishment, and then he's trying to push this agenda forward. Right? So for me, the American discourse on religion makes no sense at all. It sort of seems to be like everybody agrees to some sort of a rule until everybody realizes that the rules make no sense, and then they completely come up with a new set of arguments. And the biggest pushback against the Judeo-Christian values is coming from the right, that is now particularly young people on the right who seem to have a problem with what's happening in Israel, right? Like in Palestine, in Gaza. So to placate that particular segment of the American right, they're trying to invent a new value system and then sort of move the Judeo-Christian value system away from the mainstream, right? So it's a fascinating time in America, the American politics, and how religion plays a role, right? And
yes, indeed.
Yes. Go ahead.
Let's take a look at this recent thing that happened. In an interview, JD Vance, a Catholic convert and MAGA figure, recently said he hoped his Hindu-born wife Usha would one day be moved by Christianity. JD, it's Usha, not Usha. Many of you, just trying to help here, not saying that mispronouncing it. If you don't know that, that's how we tend to do it. So what I tell you that he should have said, my good friend Sahana Singh captured it, and I'm going to pull it up and I'll tell you what it is. The mature words that America is not ready to hear. I'm a Christian. My wife is Hindu. I love her exactly as she is. So why would I want to change anything about her? This is the correct answer in my opinion too. It's a very good, logically thought out, mature answer. I respect my religion. I respect her religion. She respects my religion. I respect her religion. I mean, this is something that is very common in our households these days, viewers. And for him to waffle around like this was really, really sad, in my opinion. What should have been handled in a very clear way is being dragged out. Not only that, I feel bad for Usha. I mean, everything about her is being criticized. Oh, they're going to have a divorce. Just because, JD Vance is hugging the wife of Charlie Kirk, and say, oh, he's going to divorce Usha and he's going to marry Charlie's wife. And these are all, you're just letting your imagination run riot. And then commenting about, Usha's hair. Look, it's her wish and her will. How she wants to put her hair down is up to her. Who are we to say it? I mean, let's not, we shouldn't be doing this. Somehow, somewhere, people are also not, keeping within their bounds. you want to criticize Usha, if you want to really do it, take some political stance that she might have taken, and then try to criticize her, saying that, well, this is not right or this is wrong. So far, I have not seen Usha say a single word in the politics. She has basically, come across as a very polished person. Unfortunate that, just because Vance is looked at as a presidential material and they want to take pot shots, unfortunately, she's becoming collateral damage. And I think JD also needs to think a little bit more before such questions get asked in the future. I hope he watches this interview. It is important that people understand that for somebody to be successful as a president, that person has to be inclusive, be able to take everybody along with him or her. Over to you. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just pandering to his political base, right? So I don't think he can win from the center. So that puts him in the tough spot. I mean, I can't imagine Vice President JD Vance, who married a Hindu and named his kids Vivek, would have a problem with her faith. I think it might have been sort of an agreement between the two, knowing very well that he has to pander to the evangelists in the US to sort of bypass that conversation, right? Like somehow he has to win over them. How is he going to do that? Mainly because I think in the American right, amongst the younger conservatives, there is still this idea that you cannot lead United States unless you are 100% committed Christian, right? And having a Hindu wife with kids named with Hindu names is always going to be a challenge for him. And I think he's just trying to maneuver this thing to get to some sort of an understanding and move it past that, right? And as we can see, this is going to be even more of a problem for Vivek Ramaswamy, right? And I think he is playing an even more interesting game of saying he is not that different from his values are not that different from the Judeo-Christian values. Again, Judeo-Christian, so which puts him where he probably sees himself more aligned with the Judeo-Christian side of the political right at the moment, because of course there is a splinter happening with people like Tucker Carlson arguing for a new form of Christians, which is, he calls it the Anglo-Christian world or the Anglo-Christian civilization. And then, of course, the older term of Judeo-Christian. So I think Vivek Ramaswamy is sort of trying to align himself with the Judeo-Christian terminology. And he's trying to convince that, well, I believe in sort of similar concepts without sort of deviating too far from it, right? And I think this is the problem. You haven't had a population that fully understood the need for true secularism, right? I mean, in Europe, you ended up with true secularism mainly because of what happened in France, and then, of course, what happened in Germany, right? I mean, I remember there's an interesting story I heard like a few years ago that during Second World War, a friend of mine whose parents were, one of them, his father was Austrian and his mother was Italian. They were both Catholics, but their families didn't get along because each thought the other was inferior. And an Italian Catholic is inferior to an Austrian Catholic. And I could never have imagined that the fascists and the Nazis didn't get along because they thought one was inferior to the other, right? So that is the experience from which the European secular values came about. So in Europe, these sort of questions rarely come about. Like, who are you married to? What is their faith? Or do you have a personal faith? Nobody rarely asks those questions, right? Not even those in the right of British politics, like Nigel Farage, would not want to discuss his religion publicly. And I know David Cameron once said his spirituality is like FM radio while driving through the English countryside. He gets it sometimes, he doesn't get it sometimes, but he's okay with it. So, and he was the leader of the Conservative Party, right? So it is my view, I might be wrong, but both the society and the political system of Europe is far more mature to deal with religious diversity. I mean, that is why you had Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister of Britain, and nobody even batted an eyelid, except for like a couple of people who made fuss about how can a heathen be part of a ceremony for when King Charles came to the throne. I think he was asked to read a verse from the Bible, and one of the really lunatic fringe far right person asked, how could a heathen read it? And the entire country was shocked to see, well, they can't believe that a question like that can happen in Britain in 2022, right? I mean, if you look at the sort of the dharmic MPs in the parliament, like Rishi Sunak, Preeti Patel, and Suella Braverman, none of them have actually had any problem proclaiming their faith, right? Like, for example, Rishi and Preeti Patel, they openly practice their Hindu faith, and Suella Braverman openly declared that she's a Buddhist, right? So I don't, and Alok Sharma as well is also a Hindu. So it hasn't been a major problem in Europe, but I don't know how America is going to navigate this, particularly when you have people like Vivek Ramaswamy potentially running for in the next or the cycle after that.
Well, we're just trying to understand how, a country like United States can move forward. Certainly, UK may have its divisions in society, maybe, other things, but at least in terms of their prime minister's religious inclination, they are very open-minded in that, and I think that's commendable. In fact, in America, it's yet to have its first female president. That tells you that there are some things in America that still are to be done.
Indeed.
So let's hope that this recent verdict of yesterday sobers up the MAGA lobby also. Not all in MAGA are extremists in their viewpoint. Some are. And you need to, again, I can't emphasize this enough. You need to make sure that everybody aligns with your viewpoint, or you need to make sure that you can make everybody see things the way you do. And for that, you have to be very persuasive, understand the other person's viewpoint, why they are differing, and then try and find middle ground. Politics is, after all, the art of the possible. And many have traversed that bridge, walked that bridge, and have succeeded. Let's wait and see how this plays out. Kumar, wonderful conversation today, and we'll continue to talk about these things because this is just the beginning for the 2028 presidential race in the United States, developing to be a very interesting contest. Gavin Newsom is claiming victory because he got the redistricting of California done just like that by one proposition.
Indeed.
Easy peasy. As you can see, in Texas, they huffed and puffed and puffed and huffed, and they think they can get 5 extra Republican seats. But the new redistricted seats, 8 of them have become very, very close. So sometimes, you are spiting your nose because you don't like the face. So the gerrymandering can only meander for so long because this is not an easy thing to do. Thank you so much. And we'll be talking again, viewers, with Kumar in the near future as things heat up in United Kingdom as well as in USA. Who knows who's going to go to polls first? It could be even UK. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Namaskar.